Happy Wind Down Wednesday. I am Isis with Sistah Scifi, working hard to make Wednesday your new favorite day of the week. Today we will be discussing the mystery of Dunvegan Castle with T.L Huchu. This is book 3 of the Edinburgh Nights series. Hey Timothy, I have tags, I have notes, audiobooks are my friends. I listened to the 3 books in the series over the course of a week, and I learned a lot of history. I'm not a history buff. If you know me in real life, you know that I am not a history buff. It's not a huge surprise. I consider myself an Afrofuturist, so I think I spend more time looking into the future. And so I'm not very good with like American history, where I was born, or West African history, where my parents were born. And this book, particularly the first 2 books in the series, focus a lot on like the history of the United Kingdom in Scotland. And I was like, what is 5th November? I don't know. Guy Fawkes Day, in case you're wondering. So I learned a lot. There are a lot of really rich historical references, references as magic as science, which is really cool. And I just loved the adventures of Ropa Moyo. So T.L Huchu should be joining me in a second. We were messaging a lot, but I'm on here to let y'all know that we're about to go live, and I'm really excited about that. So that's my update. Tell me how your week has been in the chat while I invite TL to the conversation. Okay, so TL, you should see the request in Instagram any second now. One, I'm so grateful.
Hello.
Hey, can I just, since we're talking,
Forgive me. It seems I have a greasy camera, as these things happen.
I didn't say it was greasy. So one, I need to apologize. I saw the notification. I saw it at 3 on my calendar, and I was like, why would I put it at 3? And then I saw your message, and I was like, oh, that's why, because TL is in Edinburgh.
Yeah.
And I didn't know this. I looked at you, so I apologize for that, and thank you for staying up to hang out with us to discuss the mystery of Dunvegan Castle.
That's quite all right. It's great to be here with you.
Yay! So let me just, I'm glad folks are enjoying the live. Afrofuturism Academy, I'm glad your week is going well so far. So before we dive into the book and the series,
Right.
please.
Let me just do one thing to improve my lighting.
Okay.
But please go on while I set up.
Yeah, so I love self-introductions. It keeps it casual and conversational. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, hello, I am T.L Huchu. I write SFF and crime as T.L Huchu. My first published novel was The Hairdresser of Harare a lifetime ago. This was 2010. And I work in short fiction as well across different genres. Hey, Taffa Cakes. And, I'm the author of this Edinburgh Nights series. We're going to be talking about the mystery of Dunvegan Castle. The first 2 books are The Library of the Dead, which came out in 2021, Our Lady of Mysterious Ailments, which came out 2022. And the books are told by Ropa, who is a young ghost stalker. She speaks with ghosts for a living, and she's caught up in all sorts of shenanigans to do with Scottish magic. Yeah.
I love
Is that a
that. I love that.
great enough introduction?
Yeah, so I'm like, we're definitely going to talk about the mystery of Dunvegan Castle. The way I usually split it up is that the first half is spoiler free. So if you haven't read the book, you can feel free to join our conversation. Um, but before we dive into that, tell us more about you and your journey in your journey to writing the Edinburgh Nights series. So you were born in Zimbabwe, but as an adult,
Yes, I will.
you spent your adult years in Edinburgh. Oh, that's much better. You're like, yeah, I know. Uh,
Yeah.
awesome. And you spent your adult years in Edinburgh. How did that come to be?
To be well, I sort of moved to Scotland in 2005. Before that, I'd done 3 years down in England, which is a different country. I'll have everyone know. Yeah, people look at the map of the United Kingdom and they're like, yeah, that's all England. Yeah, so I moved up as a student to study podiatry. So cue
Yes.
foot fetish jokes. Um, I did that, but I was writing all this time. I had always had a passion for literature. You know, I loved books as a kid. I used to go to the library often just to borrow stuff and devour books. And in my early 20s, the bug really caught me, and I started working at it. You know, building up my craft. It was a good 8 years before I got published. In 2010. So, you know, I was working as a podiatrist at the time, but then I decided, well, this is what I want to do with myself, and gradually, eventually made the shift to writing full time. But how I got into writing fantasies is I went into this as a general reader, you know, as a reader first. And I naively believed at the time that you could just do whatever you want to do. But when you're in the industry, you realize that publishers kind of want you to brand. So if you do something, they want you to kind of stay in that lane and do more of that, particularly if it's working and it's had some success, which my first novel did. So I remember getting all this pressure to keep doing the same thing, but I wanted to try other stuff. So you know, whenever people give you good advice, don't take it. You do the exact opposite. I started ramping up my production of stuff in SFF and crime, kind of using the short stories as my R&D department. And in 2015, I did this story called Ghostalker, which was set in my hometown of Bindura in Zimbabwe, about a young girl who talks to ghosts for a living, and it's a pretty mundane job. So I really liked the fizzy voice the character had, and I liked the premise of the story, but I didn't know if it had enough legs to work as a novel. And in 2017, I did another story called The Library of the Dead, which was set in Harare. Now we've got this Heroes Acre in Zimbabwe, which is where they bury all these old guys that fought in our War of Liberation, because we were a British colony until 1980. So I was using the concept of bodies and cemeteries as repositories of memory, and I did that story. I knew it was set in the same universe as the Ghost Stalker story, and I wanted to blend the two together. So when I eventually got round to working on the novel, initially I set it in my hometown of Bindura in Zimbabwe, but it's a very small town, and I wanted a larger canvas to work on. So I went to the place that I know best, second best, which is Edinburgh. Um, but that transition meant I had to change certain aspects of the culture, the language, and certain internal dynamics, the history, and all those things. Yeah.
Got it. That was so because I knew you were born in Zimbabwe, and I hadn't read. I started reading the series like after I knew who you were. So I was like, I think it took me some mental adjustment. Like, oh, this is set in Scotland. Like, it's not set in Zimbabwe. It's so. And I was like, and I think from an American, very American perspective, I was like, why is it set in Scotland? And that's something I need to sit with. Um, so tell me, and it's written in a very distinct voice, right? In the colloquialisms, like at one point, Ropa Moyo says, and it was lit up like 5th November, and I had to stop and Google like what is 5th November? Like I imagine it's something like 4th of July. So walk me through like did that come naturally? Was there any conversation between you and your editor, like how that would land with an international reader base, or was it? Did it just feel? Did it just not? Was it not a thing?
All right, so there's a lot packed in there, Isis. So let's see where to begin. Voice is very important in a first-person narration. It's pretty difficult to do a third-person narration that's full of colloquialisms and plays with voice in certain ways. It third person. This isn't to say it doesn't happen, but you tend to get that more neutral literary kind of voice in third-person narrations, whereas your first-person narrator can afford to be extremely distinct. So one of the things that I was doing when I designed Ropa's voice is I wanted something that was sonically pulling in different directions. Um, if you will notice that she uses Scots, she uses a bit of Shona, she'll use a bit of slang borrowed from American culture because that's kind of a global thing. And so there's all these influences pulling at one another. And while to certain readers, it might seem unusual. But if you're bilingual, as I am, code switching isn't anything surprising. I mean, or if you've at least been a teenager at some point in your life, which most people go through, you realize that there is a private language that you might have between you and your peers, and your language changes depending on the sort of social setting that you're in. I've got god kids who were born and raised here, from some of my Zimbabwean friends, and you can tell when they're with their peers that they speak a certain way, but they tone down for us because we're old, we are fossils, and they figure we probably won't understand if they use that kind of language around us. So you've got that going on with Ropa, and I'm also the kind of person who, how most creative writing advice tells you to avoid cliches.
Mm.
Yeah, you should coin fresh metaphors, that kind of thing. I go completely the opposite direction in that I believe these sort of like cliches, these everyday phrases that we find in language, I think they contain a sort of like the linguistic genius of whatever culture that happened to spawn them. For example, when Ropa sees the first kid in the Library of the Dead who has had their youth sucked out of them,
Yeah.
she notices the kid looks old, like they've aged prematurely. Now, you can come up with so many different ways of describing that as a reader, but I remember there was a time I was in Doncaster with my friend Nikki, and we met someone that she'd gone to school with, and she was like, "Yeah, I went to school with that guy, but he looked so much older than her." I said, "Yeah, but how's that even possible?" And she said to me, "He's at a hard paper round." I mean, you you will not be able to beat that phrase anyway because that just tells you everything you need to know. So I'm looking for these little gems because again, I'm not from Scotland. I'm not from the UK. So things that might appear common to people that were born in this culture. For me, I listen to them, I'm like, what? What does that even mean? That's brilliant. And they're like, what are you talking about? Everyone says this, right? So those are the little things that I'm trying to insert within the text. Now, in terms of an international readership, um, again, I think the best literature is local. Um, in the sense that I I remember at some point reading this book by Chad Harback called The Art of Fielding, which is about baseball. Now, I know nothing at all about baseball. You talk to me about cricket, I understand it really well. But I wouldn't have wanted them to tone it down so that there's some kind of international reader who would understand it. Because the more you immerse yourself into it, you will start getting exactly what is going on. You just need to give yourself a bit of time to get into it. Because I think if you start watering stuff down for some kind of perceived audience, what ends up happening is you lose some of that authenticity and some of the internal drive that you had within the story. Now, this isn't to say there isn't any editing that happens, because I'm one of those. I enjoy being edited. I think editors bring a lot of value into the text, and it's because when you are writing, you're deeply embedded in the thing. You know exactly how the thing works, and it works great in your head. But someone else coming and looking at it might not see what you see. So, for example, some of the notes that my editor gives me will be like, okay, we kind of need a bit of clarification as to Ropa's thought processes as she's doing this investigation. She's got to bring the clues together a bit more for us so we actually see how she gets to this conclusion. Things like that are very important. Yeah.
I love that. So I loved that awareness on code switching and how being multilingual, I'm like embarrassingly unilingual. So like that impacted your writing. So I enjoyed that. I also enjoyed like the authenticity of the voice, right? And what it means to allow yourself as a reader to immerse yourself in a voice. Like what I'll say is like, for me, it was very rewarding to immerse myself in a voice and a cultural experience that's so different from my lived experience. Like I've never been to Scotland. I've never been to Edinburgh. So I really enjoyed it, and I got to like, particularly for the third book, listen to the audiobook while reading the physical book, so I could hear an actor embody Ropa Moyo while also seeing your words. There's so much that I loved about the series, right? But for somebody who thinks of today's magic as the science of the future, I loved the Somerville equation. Like I was just like, yes, like what is the yield of magic? Like it is potential, the particular is potential combustible materials, the threshold, and the natural resistance. Like, of course. So how did that come about?
Oh yeah. It's fun designing the magic system. Now, the magic system is I've described the process of writing this book before as a call and response between me and the city of Edinburgh, in the sense that I initially had a pretty different magic system designed, but as I started writing, I knew where I wanted the Library of the Dead to be located, and I was looking for an entrance point for it. So I went tramping around these old graveyards in the city center and settled on the old Carlton burial ground. Now it's this burial ground that is pretty interesting and unique, compared to all the others in the city center, because that one was originally set aside for Jews because they couldn't be buried in the Christian cemeteries. So there was a Jewish gentist who petitioned to have a cemetery for them as well in the city, and this is in the 18th century. And as a result, the atheists were also buried there, because that was the space for anyone who was non-Christian, pretty much. And one of the people buried there was David Hume, the famous Enlightenment philosopher. And so there's this beautiful round mausoleum. So I see the mausoleum first, and I'm like, okay, that's a cool setting. I then decide, okay, so this is Hume's mausoleum. What do I know about Hume? Skepticism, empiricism. So I decide then that the Society of Magicians is called the Society of Skeptical Enquirers as a nod to Hume. And therefore, all the science that I use for the Scottish magic in there has to be tied into Enlightenment figures. So James Clerk Maxwell, Lord Kelvin, and all those kind of figures. They appear in it. But I've always been a fan of Mary Somerville, who was this 18th century polymath, female polymath, and therefore I decided to work her into the story and have this equation. So the magic system itself, they call it scientific magic, which is an oxymoron, right? Because as soon as something becomes explainable by science, it cannot be magic, and vice versa. So it's something that I do with a nod and a wink. I decided to have an equation there, and one of the things I've done through the series is with each book, I kind of touch on a certain aspect of the equation, and we're kind of working on all those terms gradually. So your first spell is the fire spell, and that's what's described by the Somerville equation. But I'm trying to show that the equation also can be used to interpret, or at least to get a better understanding of other facets of the magic, even if you're using a different spell. That is kind of like your foundational understanding of how magic works in this particular universe. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I loved that being on the border. I mean, like, even though it's done with the wink of that border of magic and science, right? And like in book one, it's like we are learning with Ropa as she understands like the science of magic and how she gravitates that versus like trying to learn from her grandmother. And then like in book three, like we've gotten, but in the mystery of Dunvegan Castle, then we see the debates and like kind of like the history of like. So I enjoyed that a lot. I was smiling in that answer because you do something that you did very frequently in the series where we get like these historical vignettes, right? Which to me were very rich. So like Ropa's exploring or reading a book, like literally reading a book in a book, like listening to an audiobook oftentimes, sometimes through an earworm. And then we get this historical vignette. And I was like, oh, this like, see, I must have done a lot of research. But then I'm thinking like, is this the way you just like have conversations?
Yeah, it's the history itself. I kind of look at it as gravity. It's the force that holds everything else within the narrative around it. So you've got real actual history that's embedded within the text. Say the history of the Royal Bank of Scotland, which is in Our Lady of Mysterious Ailments. The history of the clan feuds between the MacDonalds and the MacLeods in the mystery at Dunvegan Castle. So there is a lot of real history in there. What I am doing is blending that in with made up history. So and it's a lot of fun to do because as I'm working through it, I'm always kind of trying to think, okay, so how then would this, if magic was a thing, what would be the result of it without straying too far from the actual history? So it's almost like sprinkled atop that. And you end up getting like really interesting perspectives. For example, the magic itself, we come to an understanding that magicians magicians from across the world might view magic differently from the Scottish magicians. It's all based on your culture. And this is also, yeah, and this is also because, you know, I look at my life. I was raised in a sort of like a conservative Catholic family, and you tend to view the world in one way. I've since left religion, and as a result, I see the world, but the world still works. It's kind of one of those weird things, and probably why we end up having all these conflicts, because everyone has a certain kind of worldview, and they think this is how the world works, but we're all going about that as the center of the universe, and these ideas often end up clashing. You know, it can be interesting as they mix, but it can also lead to disastrous outcomes. But the actual history is it's a point of fascination for me. You know, I'm fascinated by the period of the Scottish Enlightenment. You can imagine, Scotland is a small country today. It's a population of 5 million, but the impact that it's had globally is immense, in science, in education, in medicine, in literature, in philosophy, in virtually any field that you can think of. Um, but that's both good and bad. Like, if we go back to the second book, right, the history of the Royal Bank of Scotland, who I opened an account with when I was a student, and it was it's Our Lady of Mysterious Ailments. Um, that's the second book. So, you know, I banked with these guys for a while, but when you understand, and their corporate headquarters is the headquarters that I use for the Society of Skeptical Enquirers. That's kind of, the building is split between the magicians and the bankers. Now, that might seem odd, but the history of the Royal Bank of Scotland, which I didn't know when I moved here, is the history of modern Scotland. All right. So Scotland has colonial ambitions in the early 18th century, right? They see that the Portuguese are at it, the English are building an empire and making a shit ton of money, the French are in it, you know, the Dutch are in it, and they're all doing well. So the Scots decide to colonize Panama, because of this guy called James Patterson. And he kind of realized that Panama is so strategically located that they wouldn't have the clout to get a lot of land as the others have. But if they set up a free trade zone there, you know, the business will just come to them. And we all know the debates that are happening to do with the Panama Canal right now, just how strategically important that area is. But the Scottish make a hash of it. They pour in a lot of money. It pretty much tanks the economy, and then they're forced into union with England. So they join union with England because they shared the same king at the time, even though they were separate nations, you know, with their own parliament, their own laws. It gets absurd at some point. Was it James the First who was king when the Scots decided to go to war with the English? And again, they had the same king. So the Scottish army marched south of the border, you know, pillaging, raiding, looting, and they demanded that the king pay for it since, you know, he was their sovereign. And the English simultaneously were demanding that the king defend them from the Scots since he was their king. So you can see how this history can get pretty interesting. But anyway, you take that history of the Royal Bank of Scotland, it was a vehicle that was created to siphon money, well, to move money back to all these Scottish aristocrats that had lost money in their imperial adventure. And that's why we have this bank that's 300 years old. But alongside that comes, you know, empire, slavery, all the horrors associated with that. That's all woven into these institutions that are now sanitized. And so this is kind of like the story that I'm telling through these books, even though it's probably not as on the nose. I'm a kind of person, I prefer a certain kind of subtlety when I tell these stories, as opposed to, oh my God, what a horrible institution the Royal Bank of Scotland is. I would much rather tell the story and leave it to the reader to make up their own mind what they think about it.
And I think it added a lot for me, a level of depth and richness to the series, right? So we have the adventures of Ropa and we have Priya, right? And they are navigating this very complex and interesting magic system and solving crimes. And then also, as me as a reader, I get to read and learn about this very fascinating history, right? Which comes up in very relevant points throughout the book, which is very rewarding for me. It was like kind of like being in a game and then also getting a chance to find Easter eggs. So I enjoyed that a lot. So if it was the Royal Bank of Scotland, you in book 3, we talk about. I'm trying to find the passage in my. Oh yes.
You've got a lot of
I
pages marked
tabbed
out.
like almost everything. I was like, oh, this is interesting. This seems interesting. So like on page 312 of my edition, which may be different from yours, we're talking about like what happened to the last emperor of Ethiopia. And so like all of that was really fascinating to me, bringing the history that like Ethiopia is one of the few African, like one of the only African countries except for the whole occupation by Italy that was never colonialized. And I just loved those real historical facts. So yes, so thank you. So let's talk. I'm checking the time. Okay, so we're kind of at the halfway mark. For those of you who just joined or joined late, we are on. This is Sistah Sci-Fi Wednesday. We are discussing the Edinburgh Nights series, primarily the most recent book that came out, The Mystery of Dunvegan Castle, with T.L Huchu. And I'm loving every minute of it. So now I want to dive deeper into the characters. First, I'll ask a really basic question. Which of the characters you feel is most like you?
Most like me. Jesus.
Yeah.
That's a very difficult question. I guess you sprinkle a bit of yourself in all your characters. But one of the things that I enjoy about writing is imagining something other than yourself. And that's how I view Ropa. I think as a person, she's much smarter than I could ever be. She's also much more driven and ambitious than, I'm more laid back and chilled out about things. Priya is too much of a thrill seeker for my liking. I think she's an adrenaline junkie, and I do like that kind of thing, but not so much. I guess I would be a bit maybe leaning towards the nerdishness of someone like Jomo. You know, yeah, I think I would be more like Jomo, a bit cautious, not the kind of person that you want to take with you on a magical battle, but I would happily do the research in a safe, cozy library, you know. But these other characters that I would love to be. I would love to be like Lord Samarasinghe, who, when I was writing The Mystery of Dunvegan Castle, was just a joy to work with. Like every time he was on the page, I mean, he is the English Sorcerer Royal. And he comes to this conference that the Scottish magicians are having uninvited. And in every scene, he's a bit of a shit stirrer and he seems to enjoy it. But he's also immensely powerful that everyone is walking on eggshells around him. So he was a very interesting one. If I could come back in another life, yeah, I would be a bastard like him.
I mean, that's the thing. I like the Sorcerer Royal is a very charismatic character who is very dangerous. So there's an allure to him, and I'm like, and he's like, I don't know if you watch The Walking Dead. He's like Negan, right? Like you're like, I like him, and he is like deadly dangerous, right? So yes, he is definitely one of the characters that steps off the page. So
since we're doing The Walking Dead, Daryl was a bit of an inspiration for Ropa as well. That's why she's always foraging and hunting and doing stuff in the city. Yeah, I was riffing off Daryl, but yeah, you did get the Negan vibe of the Sorcerer Royal. So yeah, I should get zombies in there now.
Okay. So I'll save this question for the end. So Ropa, when the series starts, if I remember correctly, is 14. So Ropa is young, right? Do you consider the series YA?
See, when I wrote it, I knew I was writing a young person dealing with adult issues, and there's a reason for this. We've spoken about history, right? This whole idea that we have about 14-year-olds as kids or young it's a pretty modern idea, right? Because historically, they probably would be running households. Now, when I trained as a podiatrist, I kept meeting these old people because most of the people with feet problems are old. And they'll tell you these stories when they're in your chair that I went to work at 14 because you didn't get this extended adolescence that now kind of lasts well into your 30s like we do in this day and age, right? And in a lot of different parts of the world, kids that age do work and they're responsible for looking after the home. And so because this book has that dystopian vibe, I made sure that I wanted a young person who was firmly in the adult world because of their circumstances. So and it seems unusual to people, but 100, 200 years ago, no one would bat an eyelid at the fact that a 14-year-old was doing work. And she's 14 going on 15. In the subsequent books, I think she's already had a birthday, but the reason I omitted that was because of her circumstances. There wouldn't be a birthday party or any major celebration. She'll just keep it moving. But definitely, once my agent had submitted the books, there was interest both from YA publishers and from adult publishers, and we went with Tor because they felt it had that crossover effect. Yeah.
Yeah. So I agree. Like Ropa is in terms of age, like the age is small, but her lived experience, like caring for a grandmother, caring for a younger sister, puts Ropa in, like, requires Ropa to navigate very adult responsibilities. And so I'm jumping kind of towards the end of the Mystery of Dunvegan Castle. So even knowing that, like, Ropa is working, Ropa is caring for her family, I was still really surprised when Calendar picked Ropa as his second. I was like, oh, we're going to pick. I was like, it was one place where I was like, no, Ropa's a child. Like, and I understood why that happened and it made sense. And of course, but I was like, oh my God, Ropa's a child. How did it feel to write that scene and walk the reader through that decision for Calendar?
That scene. So Calendar is the secretary of the Society of Skeptical Enquirers. So he is Scotland's top magician. Calendar is extremely powerful, but right from one of the first scenes we see him, we notice he's not politically savvy. He's a good guy, but he doesn't seem to be, the first scene you have him in the Library of the Dead, Shavon, who turns out to be the villain, sorry, spoilers, for anyone who hasn't read it, walks out of his office complaining about something, a problem that he can't solve for. And we constantly see this friction between him and the other magicians. It almost seems like he feels he's above certain issues that they bring to him. And when things kick off in the castle, we notice he retreats instead of engaging with his peers in trying to solve this. So Calendar he's got that classic problem. You know when you have a politician that you like, right? And they're a good person, but somehow you know they won't make it simply because you need to be a bit of a shark. You need that savviness, that cruel streak that most people within that field have in order to survive. And so we also notice through the mystery at Dunvegan Castle that Calendar doesn't trust his peers because they're all politicking, they're all scheming, they're all plotting. And this is why time and time again he chooses Ropa, who's the outsider, who herself isn't a full member of the society, to do things with them. Although in terms of the jewel, just narrowing it down to the jewel itself, the role of the second, because there's so many people about, is kind of more ceremonial than anything. But still, he goes on to pick her over everyone else. And you can imagine how that will rankle these other magicians that don't even want her there in the first place. So Calendar, it doesn't exactly make Ropa's life easy, or easier, and he doesn't manage the politics very well. And all these things, are embedded in the story for the reader to see. And by the time we come to book 4, which I've just sent off to the agent, all these sort of pressures are, it's leading to an explosion. Yeah.
Okay. I was like, I finished book 3 and I was like, okay, obviously there's a book 4. Because the Sorcerer Royal might be the Dark Lord, or he might just have, like, the tea just may have made him giddy. For those of you who haven't read the book, that is a major spoiler. But I told you we're at the part where spoilers are okay. So I definitely want to touch upon that. But I really also want to talk about Ropa's grandmother, because I was like, there's a whole story here that I feel like the 3 books hint to. Like, it seems like Ropa's grandmother was not only a part of the society, but very senior and well respected in the society at some point and walked away. Will the 4th book give us a glimpse into that, or am I making something up?
No, you've got it. It's and I'm glad you noticed all those things. So in the first book, it's Ropa's grandma who pretty much convinces her to help a ghost out who wouldn't pay for her services, and that leads her down the path of getting involved with the society. Now, there is something curious that happens, that her grandma is knitting a cardigan that happens to be the right size for the kid Ropa saves at the end of it. So we keep getting these hints that Gran knows a lot more than she's telling on, even though Ropa lies to her grandmother, right? Constantly. But in the second book, Calendar visits Gran, and we realize that there's some kind of history between the two. She's off stage and mentioned in the third book, but everything is coming together now because, there's all these balls that are thrown in the air. And this is why writing the 4th book was so difficult, because now you're trying to catch everything and you're trying to, add all the pieces, but they didn't quite fit. As I started writing, I was like, oh, but that's got, oh, now I can't fit it where I thought it was, and the thing takes on a different shape, and it was actually finding sort of like the best way of bringing it all together. But you are right that Ropa's grand was there have been a lot of hints now. The scarf, the jacket. So in book 4, you are definitely going to find out what her role was and how this whole thing comes together.
That's exciting for me. I was navigating that, like, through book 1 to throughout book 3, Ropa's working hard to be validated by the society. And then at the end of book 3, Ropa's like, deuces. Deuces, not this. Which I was like, sorry, I'm not. Anyway, I was like, that's something else that I had to Google while reading the book. And I was like, really? You're going to walk away? I mean, that's powerful. But like, so how was writing that? Did she come back? Is she like gone in terms of the society forever?
So, okay, so there's bits that happen within the text where the characters make their own decisions, and I haven't planned it. But one of the things that's worked into these books is the fact that we have this kind of simplistic thing that you're American, right? If you work hard, you'll succeed and you'll get the American dream and all that, um, which I think is a pile of bollocks. Life has a huge element of chance. One of the reasons, when I think of the people that I know, the friends that I have, one of the greatest causes of suffering is people thinking, but I'm a good person and I do good things and shit happens to me. And you're like, yeah, it happens to everyone, right? So Ropa is really hardworking, and she really wants to make it into this society. But there's always like this pushback and this resistance against her. What I removed is this reward circle that you usually get in books, right? So a character comes in and they might face a bit of prejudice or whatever, but they do something spectacular, and before you know it, everyone loves them, and it's like, oh, you're welcome, you're one of us now, you're great. Um, she's not a classically. There's issues of class that she has to deal with. There's the issue that she's not a classically trained magician anyway, so there are people that resent her in that space. It would be like if you got a gig teaching at an Ivy League university without any qualifications, how that would rank all your peers. Now, you might be amazing in your field, but there will always be people that will kind of be resentful and will try to undermine you regardless of what a great teacher you might become, right? That's built into it. Or a good example is your president before the last one, who I thought was a brilliant guy. He tried to do his best for his country, but what did he get out of it? He just got a big fuck you constantly from the country that he loved. So again, there are so many analogs in the real world to this. And so Ropa, at some point, she's kind of like, I think when she goes to the conference at Dunvegan Castle, she really sees the society for what it is. Now, if I think about certain books where I've read, you've got these wise wizards, and it's so amazing to train to be a wizard, etc. But this thing is corrupt, and they're pretty much useless. They're all in it for the money and what they can make out of it, the prestige, etc. But outside of that, none of them seem to have any higher goals. So she kind of sees it from the inside, and she's like, nah, screw this. I'll do my own thing. You'll notice that the people with the most integrity in the text, in the series, tend to be, the criminals, that she deals with, or the people that stay at her, in the slum, they're kind of straight. And she has much better dealings with them than she does with these so-called magicians. So I think there is something that I was trying to do there that kind of alludes to the world that we live in.
I like that. I'm processing that. There was so much richness in your response. So thank you in terms of, I love narratives and works that kind of usurp respectability politics. And also, I mean, your piece is broader than this, but also particularly as a Black woman allows me to rethink the framework of Black excellence, right? Like, if I work hard enough, if I'm great enough, then like I'll reverse racism. I'll just wipe it out from everybody's brains. So I like that, and that definitely contextualized Ropa walking away from the society for me. What else? There's so much that I want to talk about.
The question is, will the society let her walk away? Can you walk away? Stay tuned to this channel.
I mean, grandson. I guess, I mean, obviously, so I know I'll be reading book 4. So I'm excited about that. But I'm trying to think my next question. Oh, of course. I was like, Priya. I'm like, in the next 3 minutes, I would love to talk about Priya. I love the fact that she was differently abled, and I loved her relationship with Ropa, and I love the fact that they get to talk about like mental health, particularly in book 3. As Ropa navigates panic attacks. So there's that aspect that I want to, yeah. So let me stop there. So what inspires Priya's character? And I love the fact that like in the first, particularly for me, books 1 and 2, it's like we are focused on Priya as an adrenaline junkie, and then in Dunvegan Castle, we get to see more like how Priya being differently able shows up and how Priya navigates the castle, right? So yeah, so let's, any insight on Priya's character would be amazing.
Yeah, with Priya, she was just supposed to be a bit part character in the first draft, and then my agent was like, "This character is great." Ropa had a different sidekick, a guy called Murdo, but he was again the same background. He was from the clan, the criminal underworld, and Bajan was like, these characters are too similar. He adds nothing. He's kind of just tagging along but not doing anything. So I had to cut him out, regrettably, because I really liked him. And then Priya kind of came in, because I remember the scene where she's upside down reading, and so I could tell her personality, but she also, because Ropa is never going to be the best magician in this world. She just doesn't have the training for it. So Priya is the character that does the magic, that can show you how magic works, and that's why she exists. And she's there to give Ropa a bit of support and a slightly different perspective of how things would work if you're classically trained. But for the first book, I didn't want to highlight her disability, right? Because I'm always interested in character, because I think if I were to do that, you find yourself defaulting to your stereotypes. So I always lead with character first. Okay, so who's the person in the wheelchair? Are they an asshole? Are they an adrenaline junkie? Are they a leader? Who are they as a person? Are they like Stephen Hawking, some kind of genius? And then from there, you can bring all this other stuff in. But one of the rules that I made for myself was, if she does something spectacular, then I will highlight that. But for the first couple of books, when she was just doing activities of daily living, I would consciously not draw attention to it. I would not make it a thing, because that's just how she navigates. But she's also a healer, and by book 3, we kind of start seeing a little bit more about her trading. That there's a jewel, and she helps some people out, and she also helps Ropa. I think she twigs Ropa's mental health issues before Ropa herself can even admit to them. And I thought it was important because you get films and books where characters go through the most horrendous things and they just power through into the next installment. But I thought Ropa is still a kid, as we spoke about, and she's seen people die, and also the weird stuff has happened. So it must take its toll. And now we see her kind of getting these panic attacks, and that's something that she has to address. She can't just keep charging through. But she gets by with a little help from her friends, and that's why Priya is there.
Yes. I love the dynamic with Priya. I love the section on like Ropa navigating mental, because it is true, like all these terrible things can happen, and it's like, and then the main character bounces back, and it's like there should be some type of response. And I'm glad that we get to see that, particularly in book 3. So my last question, I definitely enjoyed the audiobook. What was what was your reaction to I don't know if you heard the actor that read the audiobook, to hearing that actor bring your words to life?
The audiobooks, it's great. It's Tinashe Warikandwa, who's Scottish Zimbabwean, did the first one. And then she had to go off because her career has taken her in a different direction. So we got Kimberly Mandondo, who's also Scottish Zimbabwean, to do the subsequent books, and they're both fantastic actresses. Kind of, we were fortunate to get them this early on in their careers, and I did listen to the samples. I haven't listened to the full audiobooks yet, and that's because when I write Ropa, there's a certain voice that I hear in my head, and it's very, very distinctive. The narrators do well, but they sound a little bit different to the voice that I hear in my head. It's kind of like when you have a book that you like, and then they do a film adaptation of it, and it's like, oh no, that character looks like this now. But when you see them looking like that, something flips. Like, I mean, Lord of the Rings characters. Now, when I think of them, I only see the actors. I don't see the characters that were originally in my head anymore. So I'm kind of holding out until I finish the series, and we are nearly there, and then I'll sit back and listen to the audiobooks. But one thing about Kimberly, who's she does the accents well, and she does the Shona well as well. So I think it works, and a lot of readers have kind of commented that, especially if you're not from Scotland, you will get those kind of like linguistic nuances, that the rhythms and the tones of it. One of the things I struggle with when I do events and I'm asked to read is I have to pick out passages that don't use Scots, because my pronunciation of it is horrendous, and I know it. And Ropa also she has a different vocabulary to what I normally use, so I tend to find the passages that I can read, and I avoid the rest.
I love that. I love that. And I was like, sometimes I like ask authors on the spot, so, do you want to read an excerpt? And they're always like, hey, since you did not prepare me for this, and that's why I didn't do that to you. So, but
Thank
okay,
you.
so if you do book 4 and you decide to come back, there's absolutely no, when book 4 is published, if you decide to come back, I know to ask in advance, and you have passages laid out. And also, if you decide not to come back, I won't take that personally. Thank you so much. And
I would love to come back. Thank you for having me, and for your support as Sistah Scifi. It really it warms an author's heart, and it's just such a delight that you're reading it and deriving enjoyment from these works. So I am so grateful. Thank you.
I'm grateful. I really enjoyed the series. It introduced me to a whole new world. There's the world of the Library of the Dead, and like culturally, it was a whole new world. I love Ropa's voice, both on the text and audibly. And really, I appreciate your time and your flexibility because I really screwed the pooch on that one. So thank you so much for your grace.
Thank you. This is like the wildest thing that I'm going to do this week up at 1 a.m. It's way past my bedtime. I'm an old man now.
I mean, I was like, I haven't seen 1 a.m. in a long time. So I'm deeply, deeply, deeply grateful. So thank you so much.
Thank you, and you have a nice day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.